Upfront and Outspoken with Bob Williams. If you love the Constitution,
man is not free unless government is limited.
if you love freedom,
As government expands, liberty contracts.
if you believe in personal responsibility, if you believe America is still the greatest nation on earth, then get ready for an experience you'll never forget. This is Upfront and Outspoken. Here's your host, Bob Williams.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
And welcome back. This is, of course, Upfront Outspoken. I'm your host, Bob Williams. Glad to have you along with me on this Wednesday. I'll get it right this time. On the phone with me, as promised, he's a he's a New Yorker. I shouldn't say native New Yorker. He's also host of the radio program you hear every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time of Insurrection with Brent Lengel. I'm talking about none other than Brent Lengel. Good morning, Brent. Sorry to wake you up out of bed this time of morning.
Oh, that's all right. Plenty of rude awakenings I've been having in New York lately. So.
Well, the reason why I basically brought you on today, Brent, since you live right there in New York, there has been a lot of developments going on regarding the Ebola quarantines from any healthcare worker or persons that were in that part of the world, namely Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And the one nurse that really sparked a lot of attention, real recently, was a nurse called Casey Hickox, and she is, I tell you what, she's a fighter. She, with what she did of going on CNN and all that, made Governor Christie back down regarding the mandatory 21-day quarantine of anybody coming back. Like I said, Governor Christie did it, so did Governor Cuomo did it. We've heard Christie back down, but we haven't heard anything about Governor Cuomo backing down. And we know for a fact that in New York, Dr. Craig Spencer admitted himself to Bellevue when he started becoming symptomatic with the Ebola virus. And I want to get your reactions. First, how did New Yorkers first react when they found out we have a positive case of Ebola here? And how are people reacting to Governor Cuomo's response to this mandatory 21-day quarantine?
Yeah. Well, it really depends on the New Yorker that you're talking about. If you're talking about me and my friends, I was talking about this on Insurrection just this last Saturday. I asked Kenneth Malloy, who's one of my regular commentators, on his opinion on it, and he mentioned, which I really like, that I refuse to be afraid of Ebola for the same reason I refuse to be afraid of terrorists. A lot of New Yorkers are not, we're not freaking out about this because we already know that we've got more of a chance of marrying one of the Kardashians than we do of getting Ebola. However, on the other end of the spectrum, there's a huge amount of people freaking out about it, and a lot of it is very heavily influenced by, I hate to say, racist and nationalistic attitudes. There were 2 young children in the Bronx who had just come back from Africa in a country that was Ebola-free, had been declared this month. They came back. One was 10 and one was 13, and they were both brutally beaten while the other kids called them Ebola. So you had kids refusing to play with them, and then all of a sudden, really what this is getting at is, I feel like as a country, we're very bad at picking our priorities of what to be afraid of. I mean, Ebola is an incredibly scary disease, but way more New Yorkers and way more Americans were killed by swine flu this last year. So I think that there's to an extent reason to be alarmed. However, I think a lot of the major reaction that we have is really more latent racism than really, rationally responding to this crisis.
How is the typical New Yorker acting or reacting to Governor Cuomo's decision to go with this mandatory 21-day quarantine from anyone that had been in Liberia, in the three countries that have had this outbreak? How's the average New Yorker reacting to Governor Cuomo's decision about that?
I almost would think this might break down into where in town people live. I think a lot of the people who are significantly more right-wing are more prone to that kind of quarantine. I would say on it, I think it might be, it sounds like a good idea on the surface, but I think it might be a bit wrong-headed, and I think it'll probably lead to abuse of people by the NYPD, because that's sort of what the NYPD does these days.
Okay, you want to clarify on that just a little bit by what you mean?
Well, here's the deal. You've got this mandatory 21-day waiting period for anyone coming back from these countries. Now, that's being enforced, however, by airport security. It's being enforced, which, as we already know, they're already incredibly junky. And it's, being enforced by police officers. One of the biggest problems that we have with the NYPD in the city is that it is an immensely authoritarian organization. It's a very, very, I would say, I do not trust the NYPD to behave judiciously in pretty much even a normal situation. So I don't know, with all this hysteria going around, if I'm going to trust them to properly enforce a 21-day block. I mean, the fact that Christie was forced to back down and Cuomo isn't, I think, is more or less the fact that Republicans can be more easily criticized for racism than Democrats. So, I think it's an interesting idea, but kind of like banning air travel from Africa, it's not actually going to solve the problem. It'll make some people feel better, but at the same time, it'll probably cause more problems than it solves.
Now, the question I have is, with this mandatory 21-day, mandatory quarantine, do you would you be getting the impression that this is going to deter health workers from going into those areas? Let's say if they're from New York or from New Jersey or some of these other states that are enacting similar laws. Would you say that that is going to deter healthcare workers from going into these areas, or do you think that they're going to say, well, that's just norm, we got to deal with it?
I think it will deter them, to tell you the truth. But I think, it'd be nice to have some precautions taken with healthcare workers. I got to say, I was pretty disturbed when I found out that the doctor had been infected with Ebola, specifically because he lives, in my neighborhood. He doesn't take the same trains that I do, though he was on the A, which is one of the trains that I take regularly. Honestly, intellectually, I know that I don't have a very high chance of catching Ebola. It can't be transmitted through the air. I haven't come into contact with any infected bodily fluids or feces or anything from this doctor. But at the same time, I got to say, any disease that essentially makes you poop your organs out by the end of it, that's pretty scary. And I think the mass media here in this country is not doing a very responsible job. They're more feeding the fear than effectively letting people know just what they need to know about this disease. I mean, once again, the swine flu killed, I think, 2,300 Americans last year.
Right.
Ebola has killed one, I think. Did the guy in Texas die, or is he still hanging?
No, he died a few days after we all broke the news. In fact, the two nurses that were there, that they were becoming symptomatic, they're now back. They're healthy. They're back home. But you had mentioned that when you first heard about Dr. Spencer, and Dr. Spencer evidently lives in your neighborhood, maybe not right next door, but in your neighborhood, that you became a little concerned. What sparked that concern?
Honestly, I would say overall it's fear that has been instilled in me by many, many zombie movies. I sat there and I thought about it, and I was like, okay, is this how it starts? Do we really have this massive epidemic? And I know intellectually, no, we're not going to have a massive epidemic. This is a disease that is enabled by poverty. It's a disease that spreads and becomes the issue that it is in Africa because a lot of these countries do not have the infrastructure or the money to prevent it. Whereas Nigeria ended up squashing the epidemic almost instantly.
Right.
And the U.S. has been sending envoys over to the country to figure out specifically what it was that they did and how they did it. Honestly, we haven't seen Ebola spread much further from where it was in Texas, and we're not going to see it spread much further from where it is in America. I just don't think it's a realistic fear. But that said, just because it's not a realistic fear doesn't make you worry. You still get a little freaked out. And when the news comes in, when the news gets that close to you, as it did with me, you're going to wonder. I mean, I'm under the weather right now. I caught something over the weekend, and back of my head, I'm like, oh Lord, is this Ebola? It's not, by the way, but at the same time, I think there's a massive fear and a lot of something very primal about our fear of disease and fear of plague, and especially because in New York you're packed in so tight with so many people. You share so much of your day on the train. I mean, my commute to work is 45 minutes one way, so that's an hour and a half I'm spending on the train. If I do, about half my commute is on the A train. Let's assume that this thing did get a little bit bigger and did get a little more out of hand. You could see an epidemic really tear its way through this city.
Same thing. The one question I have is, prior to Dr. Spencer coming out, I'm sure you, like a lot of people across the country, were watching the news about what was going on in Dallas and watching about the nurses and all that. Do you think that from that type of coverage caused you to have I'm not going to say fear, but the concern about the Ebola when you heard that here in your own neck of the woods you had somebody that became symptomatic? Do you think that the way the mainstream media covered it might have influenced your decision?
It would have if I watched the mainstream media. I honestly don't. I don't watch any TV news. I don't have a cable connection. I mainly just use the internet for my information. But I will say, I've been afraid of Ebola like my entire life. And the reason I'm going to point this out is my dad's a doc. And I was always, if they were talking about STDs or if they were talking about hantavirus when I went on the Appalachian Trail, I pretty much know about every major terrible and terrifying disease that is out there, and I tend to know about it in gory detail, just because my parents, that was a topic of conversation, and two, I think my parents like to stress these kinds of things because they thought it kept me in line when I was younger. Eat your vegetables or Ebola will get you.
The thing that, it's curious when you mention that your father is a doctor. I'm sure you're in constant communications with him. What kind of reaction has he had with this outbreak? I mean, not just over in Africa, but with just a couple of cases we've had here in the United States.
Well, I spoke with my dad about it a couple of days ago. We've been in contact a little bit more recently because as you know, I got engaged a couple of weeks ago.
Well, I want to say congratulations on air about that one.
It's been a long time coming. What I will say is that with my generation, a lot of us are getting married a lot later because of financial issues, and just we came of age in the worst recession since the Great Depression. But it's an important milestone, and I'm really, really happy. Plus, she's an amazing woman, so hopefully I don't have Ebola, and I can continue to be who I am and go through the rest of it. Now, what I'll say, when I spoke to my dad, he's currently working for the CDC, not specifically working on something like Ebola. He wasn't too worried about it, to tell you the truth. And mainly it was how communicable the disease is. I think healthcare workers in particular are in more danger to it if they're doing stuff like the doctor in question here, Dr. Spencer, was working with Doctors Without Borders, which is a really heroic and wonderful thing to do. I would say the scariest thing about the whole incident is that when medical professionals are catching this, yes, they are the ones who are physically going in there and getting very close to the disease, getting close to the people who are dying of it. So obviously they're at the highest risk. The scary thing is that if they're contracting it, something in the back of my head every time says, are we not being told everything about Ebola? Is this a disease that is more communicable than otherwise we know? Because if the doctor knows all about Ebola, they're obviously going to take every precaution that they can.
Right.
But I think a lot of this also kind of comes down to, do they have the equipment that's necessary? Is the infrastructure in Africa sufficient for treating this? And also, sometimes these things just happen. You take off your hazmat suit the wrong way, you take off your gloves the wrong way, you don't properly dispose of the medical equipment, and then, bam, all of a sudden you've got it.
Right. Well, you brought up an interesting point that I've been harping on since the very first time I heard about Duncan, was that it seemed that our government was, I'm not going to say they were lying to us, but I'm saying that they were giving us misinformation. They weren't being as transparent as I thought they should be. Now, being in the younger generation, what do you think? Do you think our government acted prudently, or do you think they should have had complete openness from the very get-go?
I'm going to go with the millennial. The millennial generation tends to favor radical transparency, and I think whenever the government does not make its process clear, that's a very, very bad thing, because that indicates that covers for corruption and incompetence. With the world that we live in and how quickly information can be transmitted, there is really no excuse for the government to be somewhat obtuse with how it communicates with us. I know it's people looking after their jobs, and it's kind of the culture of previous generations, but I would really say I think they really did drop the ball there.
I got one.
That said, our government is concerned with being elected. It's concerned with a lot of really annoying aspects of representative democracy. If you look at watching the both parties savage each other, the Obama administration, the Democrats, using this crisis as an excuse to talk about how his nomination for Attorney General was stymied because of his views on gun control. And at the same time, you've got certain members of the Republican Party who are arguing that Obama is secretly working he's secretly a black nationalist working for the Africans, trying to make sure that we spread Ebola as far as possible. There's, both of these things are absolutely ridiculous. And I feel like the major election cycle is I feel like that is really what contributes to the lack of transparency and maybe, I would say, a little more of a Pollyanna response from the government.
Now, we got about a minute to go, and I want to get your response to this. We know the new czar has been appointed to oversee this Ebola situation, and the Obama administration is being criticized for the fact that we have a politician in charge of this instead of leaving it to the head of the CDC to become that spokesperson. Did the Obama administration do right by allowing a politician in there, or should they have allowed the director of the CDC to be the spokesperson? And if so, what's your reaction overall?
Well, this is what I'd say, and this kind of goes back down to my sort of anarcho-syndicalist views. I believe that the experts in a field are the ones who physically work in that field, not the administrators who oversee them. And what I'll say is, in that sense, I think, putting a politician into that position is a really, really stupid move. The director of the CDC, that's their job. I feel that they're going to be the ones that are most qualified to talk about it. And again, a politician is not going to be interested in really stopping Ebola. They're going to be interested in their own career. These are kids who grew up being the popular kid in class. They grew up running for all of these, various student government positions. They're not professionals in their field. They're publicity hounds and seekers. So, yeah, I find that to be incredibly frustrating. But then again, I find a lot about the Obama administration to be incredibly frustrating. Mainly the fact that, in my opinion, I think Obama is a 90s-era moderate Republican wearing a blue tie, pretending to be this bastion of liberal thought.
Well, Brent, I hate to do this, but our time is up. I thank you again for coming on. And once again, everybody, I want to remind you, listen to Insurrection with Brent Lengel right here on the Starcom Radio Network, 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern. Once again, Brent, thank you for coming on and give me your opinion.
Yeah, thanks very much. I had a blast. If anybody wants to check me out, you can follow me at www.brentonlengel.com or just Google my name. I'm literally the only Brenton Lengel in the world.
Thanks, Brent. We'll be talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob.
Of course, that's Brent Lengel, host of Insurrection. Glad to have him on board. And with that, it is time for me to get out of here. Stay tuned, because coming up next, right after NPR News, Ed Till will be with you all the way up until 4 o'clock. So until tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., this is Bob Williams. Take care of yourselves.